All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to see all of you here. I'm going to also be looking a little bit over to make sure that the people who are on Zoom can see as well. But welcome. My name is Jean Gordon Koshenda, and I'm the media editor for the California Writers Club of Marin. This is our events chair right here, Joanne, and our fearless president, Daniel Bacon. So I'm just going to take a very short moment to give you two housekeeping items and then tell you a little bit about California Writers Club before we get started. So the housekeeping items are that if you need to go to the restroom, there are none on this floor. You need to go up either 1 or 2 flights to get to the restrooms. And also know that the library closes at 8 o'clock. So when we finish, you're going to need to get on your way. Okay. So if you are here tonight, or if you are out there on Zoom, welcome to all of the Zoom people. It is probably because you're interested in writing. And if you write, that makes you a writer. And if you are a writer, I want to welcome you to California Writers Club, CWC Marin, and urge you to consider joining us, or at least subscribing to our newsletter, which you can do at cwcmarin.com. And there are little flyers right there on the way out. So the California Writers Club is one of the oldest writers clubs in the United States. So we have an impressive pedigree. But more important than that is CWC of Marin is a group of friends who support each other. That's what we're really here for. So if you need advice, if you want a shoulder to cry on, if you need tough love, if you just want to have somebody to talk to, if you want a recommendation for an editor, you want someone to read something that you've written and give their opinion, we are here for you. So that's the main pitch. We have a lot of exciting things going on. We meet once a month it's going to be at Book Passage. We're just changing. It's going to be I'm sorry? We're going to Book Passage, but we're going to be outdoors. I think maybe you met indoors before. So sort of a COVID safety thing. We're going to be meeting outdoors in the courtyard every 3rd Sunday of the month at 11 a.m. And you can find more information again if you go to cwcmarin.com, subscribe to our newsletter, check Meetup. It's all there. We also have a Facebook page. So that's one great way to come and meet us. We also have a lot of wonderful events planned in addition to our first in-person event since the pandemic, hooray, co-hosted by Mill Valley Public Library. Thank you very much for your help with that. Next month, Daniel Bacon is going to be doing something that's really, really cool. He's going to be leading a walking tour in San Francisco of literary historic sites in San Francisco, which I think sounds really, really cool and not something that you can just get anywhere. And he knows what he's doing. He literally wrote the book on it. We also have other online events, including, hold on, I have it right here we go. How to Write an Eye-Catching Query is coming up. How to Sell More Books. An in-person event we're going to be doing. I will be leading a Japanese classical poetry writing game, which is literally 1,000 years old, but it's still a really cool game. So I'm looking forward to doing that here in June. You don't have to be a poet, but just be kind of interested in playing this historically significant game. And we'll be having open mic nights this summer. So if you want to read something that you've written in front of a supportive audience, you can try that as well. Bottom line, we have a lot of exciting things going on. We're a fun group of people, and I hope that some people in the audience are my future friends. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over now to Daniel Bacon, our president, and our esteemed guest, Paul McHugh.
Thank you very much, Jean. Much appreciated. And I want to welcome everyone here tonight and all of those who are watching from the comfort of their homes and laptops. And I am especially excited to be here to interview one of my favorite writers, Paul McHugh, who has a very impressive pedigree And I want to start by just telling you a bit about how I met Paul and, what he has meant to me. So back in 1996, I had written a book about walking to historical sites in San Francisco called Walking San Francisco on the Barbary Coast Trail. And when that came out and I finished writing it, the trail did not exist except in my head. And I had no idea whether actually it would ever exist, which it finally did many, many years later. But at the time, I thought, well, at least I can write this guidebook and show people how they can walk through the city and discover these fantastic historic sites that are part of San Francisco's dynamic history. So, and I decided to go ahead and self-publish it, and ended up with something that I was pretty proud of. And I had to figure out how that I could get it out there to get known for. Now, if you've been writing, long, or anything about publishing, it's practically impossible to get a big city newspaper to review a self-published book. They just typically don't do it. But being naive and not knowing any better, I thought, what the heck? And one of my favorite columnists at the time for the Chronicle was this man here, Paul McHugh, who was their outside editor and used to write these great stories about kayaking all up and down the California coast and walking on these great trails and whatnot. So I thought, what the heck? I'm going to pitch this guy and see if he's interested. So, I called him up and I said, look, I've written this book about a historical walking trail, kind of based after the Freedom Trail in Boston. Why don't you come out and I'll show you my book, and maybe we'll walk a little bit of it together. And he must have got up on the right side of the bed that day, because he in fact took me up on my invitation and we walked the trail, and I gave him a copy of the book, and just thought, well, okay, maybe he'll review it, probably not, but who knows? Well, I don't know. Sometime later, not that long, maybe 2 weeks later, not only did he write a glowing review with words like tour de force in them, but the Chronicle created a whole page about the trail and about, this idea that I had to create this walking trail, along with this article. And it was like, I can't tell you, my phone was ringing off the hook for about 2 days. And I was, kind of a minor celebrity there really quickly.
I had power those days.
Yes. Well, yes, this is before, people got their news off the internet, So anyway, so I am forever in debt to Paul. But I have to say, he really is one of my favorite writers. I've read several of his novels. And so I am so pleased to be here with him today, and specifically to focus on how to create compelling characters for your work of either fiction or narrative nonfiction. So even if you're writing memoirs or biographies, you have to make the people that populate your work, you have to make them compelling. You have to make people, love to read them. And so this man knows how to do that. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay. So Paul, let me just open this up by asking you, why do you think compelling characters are the most important part of storytelling?
Well, I think our quest, our big project as human beings is understanding ourselves and making a life for ourselves. And we're always explaining ourselves to ourselves, explaining ourselves to other people and hoping they understand, and trying to understand other people. And the best way to do that I found is in stories. And it's like some of it's nonfiction in a letter or in dialogue. We tell a story to our friends, our family members. And even when we go into fiction, the better the fiction is, the more realistic the characters are, the deeper the interactions seem to be. And it's the great chess game of how we maneuver through life, and the external chess game, the internal chess game. How do we arrange our thoughts and our feelings. What do we bolster? What do we add on? What do we seek? And all of that can be explained or at least referenced in good writing. So even if it doesn't give you an explanation, it can give you a new way of thinking about it and give you a new perspective about, your life, the lives of others, and even, historical figures and so on and so forth. So the more that we have dimensionality to our characters, the more there's explainable complexities in our characters, the more a reader's curiosity is excited to learn about the character, the better the story is going to be.
Okay, and so when you want to build a compelling character, tell us how you do that. Kind of run through step by step, if you can, how you build up this character, and do you sort of imagine them, all at once, or at least, on paper first before you insert them into the story, or do the characters evolve?
Well, it can be different for a writer. There's no like one way to do it. And there are some pretty good ideas out there that make it sound simple. It's like you've probably all heard there's two basic stories. Either a stranger comes to town or someone goes on a journey, right? And in the same way, you can have a really interesting character that occurs to you. It could be a historic figure that you want to base your character on, and then you have to think of a good situation to put that character into. Or you have a situation and you think of a character that would explore or exploit that situation. So it can be, chicken or egg. It doesn't matter where you start. But I think what does matter is that your character has to have issues. If your character is too well integrated, then it's not a human being. We're all works in progress. And the way that if your character has issues, then what's going to happen is there will be approach avoidance conflicts. There will be solutions that will be sought. And this will give your story, whether it's a fiction or a nonfiction story, it'll give it that thump of truth, because you're again exciting the curiosity of the reader. So how do you go about creating that kind of a character? Well, let's say you start off with a situation instead of starting off with a character. And let's say it's all situations are historical or soon will be, right? But you can research the ground where the story will take place and find out a lot about what that situation is. And this is what I call the trawling phase. It's like you're just collecting information, and you don't want to decide prematurely what your character is or who she is or who he is or how they think or anything. You want to research the times that character will be immersed in. So this is like, I call this the supersaturated solution of information. And once you have that supersaturated solution, then what you need is the aligned molecule, the seed crystal, okay? So let's say, your supersaturated solution is like those salt ponds in the South Bay, right? They change colors, depending on, the microscopic light, but they're getting brinier and brinier, and they're getting ready to precipitate. So what precipitates it? What sets off the chemical reaction? And what I do and what I recommend is you take a certain part of your own personality, and it may be something that you don't even manifest, or you don't want to manifest, or you wish you could manifest. Some trait that you would like to explore in yourself. And you put that in the supersaturated solution. And then all of that information starts to align on that seed crystal. Plus, you now have a key to that character. And that key is that part of you which is in that character.
So would you then say that the plot and the character develop together, or is it the chicken and egg situation, where, what comes first, right?
You
the
could do
plot
it,
or the character, or do they both come together at once?
Okay. For me, it's a growth process. I mean, it's a voyage that I and the characters are on together. And there are some things that I know are going to happen. I mean, I start off with some kind of a story idea. It doesn't mean I'm not willing to sabotage the story idea or change it as I go along. All right. But I grew up in South Florida, so my mental image is of the Intercoastal Waterway. Okay, so there's pilings, and some of those pilings are miles apart. And so I know that I'm going to go by that piling, and I know that beyond that there'll be another piling, right? But I don't know the course or the terrain or the water or the fish or the vegetation or anything else that I'm going to pass. I just know I'm going to, go by those things. And so then I set out, and my characters are on the boat with me, right? We're all traveling together, and it's a process of discovery. And that makes the writing process exciting for me. And it also makes it exciting for my characters because they don't know what's going to happen to them either, right? This isn't the only way to do it. One of my friends in college turned into, and I'm not going to mention her name, but she's a very famous scriptwriter now, highly successful. And the way that she would do it is like she would write down on index cards all the scenes that would perfectly work out her plot and spread them out on our living room floor, and then change the cards back and forth as she was gradually, creating the symphony. And it worked for her. Oops. Okay, good. And that just didn't happen to be my process. But I think that if your characters are complex enough to interact with each other and interact with the plot, then the key is, I think, that the plot has to hinge on character development. That is the most interesting way to have a plot. And I can tell you more about that if you want me to. I mean, why should plot hinge on character development?
Yes, let's get to that. But
Okay.
I'm also interested in tension and conflict, because those are two things that you have to pretty much introduce fairly early on as well, don't you? Or no, or do you feel differently?
Okay, so conflict is interesting, but it's not the only interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and conflict can occur at various levels. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't need to be physical conflict.
Right.
Okay. The main thing John Gardner talks about profluence of storytelling, and basically that means what compels people to turn pages. What makes them want to find out what happens next. So I think the even more than conflict, and it is what does conflict and storytelling do is it excites your curiosity. So can you excite curiosity in ways other than conflict? You certainly can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the things that a writer should do and always try to do in your writing is make the reader curious about the nextness of the story.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what's around the bend? Now, what's around the bend could be physical. What's around the bend could be discovery the character makes about him or herself or about the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
Changes their view, changes the way they think they ought to act, changes the outcome. All right. So if you can excite that kind of curiosity, you can do it with conflict, interpersonal conflict, actual physical conflict, warfare, international conflict, right? But also
Internal
deeply
conflict.
internal conflict. It's
Yes.
like, am I becoming the kind of person I want to be? Am I becoming the person I always feared I was going to be? How do I stop it? So these are all ways of addressing that profluence.
Right. So tell us about the importance of having flaws in a character.
Well, I would say rule number one is perfection is boring. It's like the line of the song, "Heaven is a place where nothing ever happens," right? So if you have a character that has issues, then those issues are going to have to be faced or resolved or avoided with consequences of their own, right? So the more complex a character, you don't want to confuse the reader to the point that they lose interest in the character, right? But the more complex they are, the more stuff they're working on, the more curiosity you can excite about where's this guy going to go?
Right.
And then also you may have the reader identify with one or another of the characters, okay?
Mhm.
So what the flaws do is they make the character interesting, they give the character challenges, they give the other characters something to interact with. Or avoid, which can also be part of the plot. Like, why did you wait until now to tell me this?
What do you mean you killed my wife?
Yeah, right. And I think I can explain it like in a genre way. Probably the most boring stories that are current now are superhero stories, comic book movies, okay? And you could see how contrived they are because you have this not omnipotent, they always have to have their fatal weakness, but it's usually just whatever weakness it is, it's just an add-on, right? Because they're a superhero, they're actually going to triumph in the end because they always do. It's a boring story. Okay. Take another genre, mystery and thrillers. You notice that the really successful stories, the detectives that you want to see over and over again, are flawed people, right? And there's easy kind of cheap ways of doing it, like make your detective an alcoholic. Guilty, I've done that myself. The interesting thing about the flaws and the detective is the detective's job is sewing up a tear in the social fabric, solving the crime, solving the mystery, nabbing the killer. If it's too easy because the detective's too perfect, you don't have a really exciting plot. There's not a lot of suspense. But the interesting thing is, this flawed knight, this champion of justice, if he is flawed, it gives us hope because we may not think that we can solve the crime or apprehend the killer because we're flawed. But if the detective is flawed as well, if he spills coffee on his tie the same way we spill coffee on our ties, then we go, well, hey, it's like I could maybe sew up the flaws in reality and the rips in the social fabric myself. And so that winds up being the big optimistic result of a good mystery or thriller.
Okay, so you've created a character.
Yeah.
You have made it so he's not perfect, right? You've given him flaws, right? You've put him in some sort of situation, which he's perhaps got to figure out one way or another, right? Whether it's interpersonal or interacting with the world in some way. What other pitfalls should we be trying to avoid in building our characters?
Okay, I think that the single biggest pitfall in storytelling is for the writer, the storyteller, to tell the audience or the reader how to feel, how to think about the character. Basically, as soon as you do that, you shallot out your own story, because and this is the essence of melodrama. It's not thin characters and predictable results, but also pretty much the storyteller saying, here's how you ought to feel about this character. Here's your villain, there's your good guy, here's what's going to happen. And he's going to, she'll get tied to the railroad tracks, then along comes Jones, right? So a far better story is one where in truth, as a writer, as a storyteller, you're actually always telling your reader how to think about your characters in your story, but you have to conceal that. You've got to be, like a magician and not make it apparent that you are telling a story. You want it to be like a dream of life that is being broadcast in the cranium of your reader. So if you find yourself being too obvious about telling the reader who your characters are, or too obvious about outcomes, slap yourself on the wrist, unweave what you've written so far and reweave it so it's not quite so clear, or so that the outcome is far more uncertain. How's that?
So in other words, you want to have some surprises, then you want to have maybe the character do something not too far out of character, but maybe a little bit to surprise the reader and to keep the reader on their toes.
And a character that can surprise him or herself.
Okay,
by what they decide and when they decide to do it. So, you know, the great thing about that is that, and you know, in good storytelling, what you want is very similitude. You want the sense of life. Okay. If the audience knows too much about the character, there's no sense of discovery. So that eliminates the curiosity drive. Okay. But also in life, the way that we find out about ourselves and about each other's through interactions. So if the reader is finding out about your character through the interactions and not by bald-faced storytelling on the part of the author, that makes it more lifelike.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is it sometimes bothers me when I read certain books is if the story becomes too contrived. You know, there are too many coincidences. There are too many, tropes that we've all read a million times before. So after a while, you sort of go, this character doesn't feel that real to me, and therefore is less engaging.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's true?
Yeah. So, as a character evolves, you want them to face real choices. A character that can really literally go one way or the other.
Right.
And to get back to the idea of like the plot should hinge on character development. We've all seen the really crappy movie climax, where there's a digital readout on a bomb, and the central character has to decide what color of wire to clip, right? Oh. As the readout is ticking down towards the spaceship blowing up or what have you. And to me that is a sign of a criminal lack of imagination, because it really should depend on what a central character decides about his or her life, or his or her loyalties, or his or her sympathies, or their willingness to sacrifice or their unwillingness to sacrifice. That's a decision that the plot should hinge on, not what color wire you snip, right? So in place of the wire snipper, imagine a double agent, right? And you could still have a bomb, but the double agent has to decide, where do my loyalties really lie? Who am I willing to hurt? Who am I not willing to hurt? And now you've got something that's not only fascinating, but also will give you insight into human character.
So yeah, I think a lot about and moral dilemmas.
Yeah.
And how those can be so compelling when you're, in a plot for a character where they really have to decide, yes, which way do I go? If I go this way, I'm going to hurt that person, or if I go this way, I'm going to, end up in jail. And where do I go? And I love that situation. It's because it's that internal conflict, and it has nothing to do with, fighting or battles or anything, but it's still very compelling to read. Now, Paul, I've read several of Paul's novels, and his books are, for me, very cinematic. And part of that is because he does incredible descriptions. Like, he puts you in a scene and you see what's going on. You see the character here and the other character on the table and the mountain in the background. And it's just very cinematic. And as they flow through the scene, I was even telling him earlier that I'm reading a book that he's going to be coming out with of his in May called Splinter. And he is letting me read a pre-copy. And immediately there's this great scene where this character is training other characters, and I'm immediately thinking in my head, Simon Pegg. That's Simon Pegg. I can see him in that part, and the dialogue is so good, so good. So tell me, what can we learn from the way screenwriters use character?
Okay. Well, let me begin by saying, and I was talking to you earlier about this. I think that cinema, more than a century of cinema, has forever changed the way that people perceive and receive stories. And I think it would be an error, even if you are completely devoted to prose fiction storytelling, to not take cinema into account in the way that you write. I mean, if you're writing nonfiction, or if you're writing memoir or anything, and one of the takeaways should be think scene by scene development. And by that I mean it's like, so if you concentrate on the way a good movie is done, you have a scene with interactions. You have maybe established a shot, you have another scene with interactions. Think about organizing your storytelling in that manner. And you'll find that it's smoother and that it's also easier for your audience to comprehend, because that's the way they're used to receiving stories. Okay. One of the great screenwriting devices that I use all the time in prose fiction writing is the idea of who owns the scene. And scriptwriters are very aware of this. And the cool thing about this concept is it doesn't have to be static. It's like you've got a scene and you say, like, character A owns the scene. Well, you can have character B object to that. You can have character C subvert it. The ownership of the scene can be like, wrestled over like a couple of dogs with a chew toy. And so that is something that I think is extremely valuable to represent, is ownership of scene. And then one other screenwriting device that I think really can help us in writing prose is the idea of how late can I get into a scene and how soon can I get out of it? All right. And what that means is it makes you more efficient about your scene. So you don't want to, tiptoe up to a scene. You want to jump into it most of the time. Now, all rules are made to be broken. Sometimes the scene is more intense if it is tiptoed up to, right? But, in general, think about how late can I get into a scene and how soon can I get out of it? And that's going to help you keep your scene writing efficient. I think there's one other aspect of this that playwrights are particularly good at, which is, have a crisis scene. Don't be scared of having a crisis scene where it's like the dice are really rolling. All the cards are on the table, right? And so you read the great playwrights and study how they do their crisis scenes. You can see it's like there's a certain amount of boldness. There's a flying leap into creating that scene. And you don't have to have, if you have every scene like that, then you'll just, you'll have unrelieved intensity. So pacing is another thing that you can learn from films. Can I do one more?
Absolutely. Go,
okay.
go, please.
The thing I think to unlearn from films is that there's a formulaic rise and fall, 3-act or 5-act structure. And you can become so mechanical about that the audience will be able to feel, or the reader will be able to feel what's coming, even if they can't predict it exactly, because they're familiar with that rhythm. It's just like a pop tune, right? So in Splinter, for example, I describe it to myself as an adventure romance. And in fact, there's kind of like this fraught love story that goes through the story. Well, it would be like falling off a log to actually have the hero wind up with the heroine at the end of the story. I don't do that. I don't have them, I have them get closer, and then I have to have them separate again. And the lady that my hero winds up romancing on a kind of ad hoc basis is not the heroine. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is, I wanted to be non-formulaic. I wanted it to be a little bit more like the accidental stuff that happens in life all the time, especially in wartime when accidents proliferate. So.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that novel. But before we do, one more question, because you were a journalist for many years, as I mentioned earlier. You was the outside editor for the Chronicle for many years. Yeah. And so I'm sure during those years you were, busy meeting deadlines and going out and having great experience. I mean, what a job, right? Going out, having great experiences, and then getting to write about it. Oh my gosh, you can't beat that. So having done that for so many years, that had to have affected the way that you create characters today.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I can cast it all the way back to my first novel, which I wrote in my 20s, and began writing when I was 22. And that's called The Search for Goodbye to Rain. And I set out on my motorcycle riding from Florida to wherever, looking for where I wanted to wind up living. And I kept a very careful diary of notebooks. I even had a little tape deck on my tank bag with a microphone I could stick under my helmet and dictate notes to myself as I rode along. And then in Santa Fe, New Mexico, camped outside in the desert, I took off and found out that the bag with all my notes had fallen off the motorcycle. And so I moved into a cabin that a friend had moved out of, and he had like free rent for another couple of weeks, and I rewrote it all from memory, and that was where the first fictional elements started to creep in. And so that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is in my 20s, the only character that I really knew, sort of, was myself. And so that was the only character I could really write about. And so that novel was a thinly veiled, self-description.
You're on the road.
Including my internal conflicts. So that novel got published when I was 30, and it didn't really change my life as much as I wanted it to. But I did find out that I was able to parlay all of my writing experience into a career in journalism. And one of the two great takeaways from that is like 40 years of interacting with people high and low across the social economic spectrum. I no longer only knew me, I knew humanity, so that was a great boon, was all these perforce interactions. And the key or the essence of journalism to me is the license to ask questions. So I could ask questions of almost anything from almost anybody, and I've only been hung up on a few times. So that was a great set of experiences, and it made it possible for me to create other characters. And then the other thing was I developed almost an OCD like compulsion to do abundant research on any topic that I was writing about. And I kept voluminous notes and background material and so forth. And one of my rules for journalism was don't impose your story on the information. Let the information reveal the story.
Right.
And I'm still that way, even when I'm writing fiction. And so, for example, Splinter is set in Norway, World War II, right? I went to Norway. I visited the prime historic sites. I talked to people. I've got a filing cabinet full of Norway information and anecdotes and such things. Okay, and out of that, I'm able to kind of grow the characters organically. I don't have to fantasize what life was like for a Norwegian in 1940. I've got it. Then it's like I can do like that particular character, let their uniqueness kind of lead them on through the information.
Yeah, I find that when I do research for a novel, it is like gathering food and fertilizer for what will then start to grow out of it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that fertilizer there, it's like trying to grow plants on rocky soil. So getting that fertilizer there is important.
So yeah, I'll give you one anecdote from Splinter. That was towards the end. Well, actually, maybe 2/3 of the way in, there's the two characters, the heroine and the hero, wind up in an isolated vacation home in the mouth of Oslo Fjord. And I decided, well, they're going to have some food, so there'll be some dried pasta and some, a bottle of spaghetti sauce, and that's what they'll have. And I put that in the story, and I gave it to a Norwegian reader. They say there was no pasta in Norway in 1940.
Yeah, right.
I said, well, what would they be eating? Bottled moose meat.
What?
Bottled moose meat.
Bottled moose meat. Oh my goodness.
Potatoes and onions from the cellar, and maybe some berry preserves.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's what they had. It said, change the menu.
So you're having this World War II novel
Yeah.
called Splinter coming out in May.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so I imagine, it's given you a perspective about the publishing industry today. And I wondered if you'd sort of share some thoughts about that.
Okay. Well, I'm old enough to have fantasies about a kind of well-regulated publishing industry that was a predictable game of steps and slides, with gatekeepers with defined roles and a certain formula for success. That is the nostalgic view, and it doesn't work that way. Even when it worked that way, it probably didn't work that way. How does it work? Probably the best line that I heard from anyone recently is people think publishing is an industry. It's not, it's a casino. And so that means, if you want to succeed in it, then you've got to have a strategy. Maybe it's counting cards, maybe it's picking the house with the best odds, but or maybe it's making friends with the casino. But I think some parts of the nostalgic traditional industry work the way they always have. They just don't work as well as they always have. So when I was learning about poetry in grammar school, I was taught a thing called a mnemonic device, a way to remember the 4 basic feet of poetry: iambic, trochaic, dactylic, and so forth. And it was, I tried all doors. And I think that's the strategy that anyone trying to make headway in publishing should bear in mind. And certainly, try to acquire an agent. I've had 3 in my career. None of them ever sold a book for me. But I learned from them. I got good advice from them. One of them helped me on a rewrite, and I've just rewritten that manuscript for probably the 8th time, and I'm resubmitting it. So yeah, I can. Would you like me to mention my advice for people?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I would. It's try all doors. Try the traditional route. Establish a platform of yourself. And it's a hideous amount of opportunity. I mean, it was LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and now Instagram, TikTok. It's like Mastodon. It's like you have all of these venues. You just pick the ones that you think you can make work for you. That's one. Network. Do favors for other writers. Get to know people. Do not dismiss any contact at any time. Burn as few bridges as possible, and if you do happen to burn one, try to save some of the timbers to build a new bridge. Keep a Rolodex or your index of contacts, and give stuff away. Make a name for yourself. Try to spread this impression of quality, and you never know where people in an industry will go. I had a friend who was a sub-editor at Motorland magazine for AAA, who wound up being a head editor at Atlantic. There's a gentleman by the name of Kent Harrington, who's a Santa Fe writer, did 2 great San Francisco books, detective novels, Last Ferry Home and Last Scene. And he said, you really ought to meet my publicist, and maybe she can, help you do some stuff. And she did. She helped me, work on my website and create my newsletter. She wound up being the marketing director for Bronzeville, who's publishing Splinter. And she had read Splinter, and she, basically it was like a straight shot over the transom. So it's like the networks and the friendships and the contacts that you create will move on through time. Don't dismiss it, and treat everyone with as much respect and kindness as you can muster. And you don't know which of those seeds may sprout.
Yes. So what I get is you need to get out in the world, both to create the fertilizer for your work, and also then to, create a network of people that you know and know you. And I think being a part of the California Writers Club is exactly what that is meant to be, is for all of us to get together and get to know each other and learn from each other, which is why we're here tonight. So, yeah.
Collective intelligence is always greater than individual intelligence. And so, read for each other, support each other, criticize each other. It's all over the course of time, I've gotten better and better at having more and more readers of a manuscript. And I always tell them, look, I want to hear everything that you react to. I want to know what draws you into the story. I want to know what bounces you out of it. And it's all, part of the great learning curve.
Yes, beta readers are gold.
Yeah.
They really are. Okay, so I think you've all got an idea about how knowledgeable and articulate and smart Paul is. And I think that, okay. I think it's true. I'm not trying to lay anything thick here. I really do believe it. So we have an opportunity, and you all have an opportunity now to interact with Paul, to ask him some questions while you got him here as a captive speaker. So I want to invite people in the audience to ask Paul some questions and see what we come up with. Oh, and I see one enthusiastic hand over here. Joanne, would you?
Let us go back to, you're saying how to not tell the reader how to feel.
Yeah.
Could you give a couple of good examples of how not to do it and how to do it?
Well,
Okay, the question is how not to tell the reader what to do or think, and then how to tell the reader what to think.
okay.
Okay.
Well, let's start off with the double negative. Delineating a double negative is an interesting linguistic challenge. First off, don't make it too obvious who the character is. All right. We praise writers who can deftly describe a character in a few lines, and justly so. But make sure that that is only a first impression. All right. And one of my techniques that I came across when I was a teenage person, not intending to be a fiction writer, but just trying to figure out the world, was look at what somebody is putting out, which is the self they want you to perceive them as. And then think about what's the exact opposite of that quality, and see if you can figure out what they're doing with that, the exact opposite. So if somebody is coming across as supremely confident, think about, well, where's their nervousness? What are they doing with that? Are they never nervous, or are they really good at concealing it? Okay. So, and if somebody is coming across as like lusty and bold and, hypersexualized, you go, well, wait a minute, what about their shyness? What about, what are they doing with that? Is this a presentation, the real person, or is there somebody terrified on the inside who's trying to overcome that? So think the same way about your characters. Think about, where's their depth, where's their contradiction? Okay, and make it a process of revelation to yourself, to your readers, to yourself as an author, and to the character. Okay, because if the character is making discovery, then so is the reader and so is the author.
And that's often what maybe they're trying to hide from the world, right? What are they trying to hide? What are they compensating for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Any other questions? Yes, Todd Crawshaw.
So I think in creating characters, first of all, I think you have to have like some kind of an intuition of what the character is going to be like. And then you're talking about the research. doing, the digging into the background of the character. And then to become the character reminds me of a interview I saw with Sir Laurence Olivier, where he was talking about portraying Hamlet on stage. And he said, when you're on stage, you have to believe you were actually Hamlet, but there's a fine line between insanity and knowing that, you're looking down and saying, you're not actually Hamlet, you're that character. But it's finding, like you were saying, that within yourself, whether you're the murderer or the heroine or the hero or the villain and stuff, you have to find that within yourself. And, with all that research you do to begin with. And predict. And then the last I just want, you mentioned Gardner, which I really loved his writing, John Gardner. I think that's who you're referring to.
What's that?
John Gardner.
John Gardner.
Yeah.
And he had said that, a quote I really love is that he said it's great novel writing is developing the continuous dream. Like if you have a dream and you
Sure.
love it and you want to come back to that dream, but you often can't. But a great novel is that you can come back to that dream over and over again. It's a continuous dream.
Okay.
And Paul,
So
Paul-
I just addressing what you were talking
repeat the
about.
question.
So
You can't. Oh, I was going to say, could you possibly repeat enough of the question so that?
Oh,
Was there actually a question there? I didn't hear a question, yeah. But he's gonna go for it anyway.
Um, so Freud, people think that Freud was all about interpretation of dreams, and it's true that, but he didn't interpret dreams the way that Carl Jung did. And I think Jung was a great interpreter of dreams, but what Freud was after was what he called the latent dream, which was, what is the emotion underneath that presentation? And even in a dream is basically, your brain trying to figure something out with all controls off, with the bark off, right? And so the id could speak, all these other things are speaking. What Freud wanted to know was, what is the unresolved emotional complex underneath the imagery? Okay, and what is that baseline? And I think, in the case of Hamlet, of course, if you're on stage and you're not conflicted about whether or not to kill the king, you're not doing Hamlet, right? And so, and I was actually thinking about Hamlet before tonight. I was thinking about some kind of good way to make some points about it, because it's I think it's in some ways, it's the first modern story. And I'm not the only person that thinks that the Hamlet is. So the line is that the king dies, the queen dies. That's just history. The king dies, the queen dies of grief. Now you're starting to bring some emotion and character into it. The king dies, the queen dies of guilt. Now you've got Hamlet. All right, now you're getting into some motivation. To me, the key moment for Hamlet is when he actually is trying out convincing Gertrude, his mother, to basically abandon, the murderer. Okay, and he succeeds, and I think him trying to convince her and succeeding at convincing her is actually what gives him his own resolve, because he's trying it out on her and it works, and he goes, that's the path, it works. Okay, and there's a lot is made of like the Oedipal relationship between Hamlet and his mother Gertrude, but I think what she really stiffens is the spine, okay, in that scene. And that's where, of course, he also at that point rips the curtain and kills Polonius, and the balloon goes up. But the main thing is he's ripped through, okay, he's gone through. And then after that, the rest of the play unfolds, but Hamlet is now certain. And it's the act of him convincing his mom that he convinces himself. So that's my answer to your next question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a question from one of our Zoom viewers, which Jean will
Right,
Sid.
and we've got about 20 people on Zoom, so they all say hi, I'm sure. I've got two questions, actually. So the first one is from Dawn. Are you able to hear me? So She asks, as you are writing, do your characters ever talk back to you and tell you what they think they should do or say?
You know,
Did everybody hear that question here, by the way? Okay, yeah, good.
one, you know, there's all kinds of benefits of playing good characters, and we talked about a number of them. And one benefit is writing can be a very isolated craft. If you get vivid characters, you'll never be alone again. And you'll know that you've got it made when they start arguing with you. You know, I would never say that. You can't make me say that. Yes, you can. Well, who do you think's really in charge here? You know, you try to make me say that, I'm not going to help you with the plot. Right? It's like you get those kinds of conversations going with your characters, and that's when you know that they're vivid because they're interactive, and they're not only interactive with you, they're interactive with the other characters, and that's when the possibilities open up for surprise, for the character to surprise themselves, surprise other characters, and for them to you know, reveal. You know, every book is the book of revelations if it's well written.
Wow. We have one more question.
Yes, we have another question. This is from Diana. She says she's happy to see you. And says, do you always limit the number of characters for a story?
That's a more organic process. The thing I probably have to watch out for is, you know, too many characters. You know, return to the, you know, commandment number 1, don't confuse the reader unless it's real important to have the reader confused. You know, it's like if you're, you know, Agatha Christie and you want to make sure they go after the red herrings, then you will do that, right? But I like fleshing out my story with characters, and I would return to screenwriter discipline. So one thing that if you're writing cinematically is you no longer do is great sprawling passages of exposition. Okay, so how are you going to do your exposition? Well, you do that with secondary, tertiary, and, you know, peripheral characters the same way they're done in the screenplay. So if you want to reveal something about a character, you have 2 subsidiary characters go, what's up with that guy? You know, do you trust him? Well, I don't. You know why? Because X, Y, Z, right? So those kinds of, and so there's a way of having characters that represent the culture, that represent the times, that have exposition roles. And those are the characters that you can like toss off with a sketch, and you don't have to spend a lot of time deepening, because what they choose to do or don't choose to do is not going to have a big impact on the plot. They've got other functions, and they can still be historical figures. They can still be representative figures, you know, just don't make them cliches.
So different characters can have different depths
Yeah.
of
And presence.
and presence, right, because you can't have every character have the same amount, because then it just it doesn't mean anything to the reader, and you don't know who to focus on, and you know, so forth. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Are we good? Any more questions from our audience here? We have one more. Okay, yes, you. Ooh, speak to the development of a character in nonfiction when the character is you.
So memoir. Okay. Well, okay.
Ish.
I would say, so, you know, turn to your idea of the, you know, every villain is the hero of his own story, right? And there are plenty of memoirs where the author is the hero of the story, you know, Mein Kampf, you know, it's like I you know, triumphed through my struggle, right? I would say that the most important thing in that case would be the budget of revelation. In other words, how much do you reveal and when do you reveal it? And how much does that process of discovery mimic the actual real timeline of discovery?
And does it need to?
Huh?
Does it need to? In other words,
Yes. I think it does.
Has to mimic the same timeline.
Well, it has to mimic the level of discovery. So you can't know too much about yourself too soon,
Right,
right?
right.
And some of your guesses about yourself will be untrue, will be proven untrue. And some of your guesses about yourself will be proven correct, you know? There may be things about yourself that you find out over the course of your life that you wish you didn't know. You may decide that you've been more of a coward than you prefer to think. All right. You may find out that because you're more of a coward than you prefer to think, that you tried to be bold in completely the wrong way and fuck things up worse. Right. You know, it's like one of my rules is no matter how bad things are, they can always be made worse. Right. And this is actually is very close to a Norwegian proverb.
You're right.
No matter how bad things are, you can always make them worse, right? So that's a good argument for stopping and thinking, you know, looking before you leap. You know, because I have only done self-revelation in part through fictional characters, your question, it would be a really big challenge for me if I was to sit down and write a memoir, right? And there are embarrassing things about my past that I have concealed. And that is right where probably the sweet spot of storytelling would be. You know, and I don't know if I can say more that would be significant beyond that. I hope that's not useful.
Very useful.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
I would like to ask myself a question.
go right ahead.
Okay. How did I come up with the idea for Splinter?
How did you come up with the idea for Splinter?
Okay, so this is interesting for as a Bay Area story. So when I was at the newspaper at the Chronicle, what I had set as a goal for myself was that I would write for all sections of the paper sooner or later. And I didn't want to, I thought as an outdoors writer, I was a little worried that I was taken as a lightweight. And in fact, to a degree I was, you know, because who wouldn't be jealous of the outdoors writer? It seems like you've got a job that consists entirely of other people's vacations. You know, of course, to do it well, you've got to do those vacations at double time or quadruple time. I mean, it's like, you know, they never began to pay me for all the hours I put into driving hither and yon to try to get like a good batch of stories in. But, you know, I did investigative series, I did features, and I also did what we called enterprise stories, which is just like you get a bright idea and then you try to track it down and see if it's going to take you anywhere. So Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the founder of City Lights Bookstore, and to me, the real king of the beats. I think the beat generations would not even be known as a generation without Ferlinghetti's efforts and without City Lights Bookstore. He was the organizing principal. I found out that he was a sailor in the U.S. Navy during World War II. I thought, well, here we are, like the king of the, he's not only the king of the beats, he's the king of the San Francisco peaceniks. What did this guy do in World War II? Well, it turned out he did some pretty fascinating stuff. I called up the bookstore. I said, I want to interview Lawrence about his World War II experiences. And son of a gun, he wanted to talk about it. So I went and met him at Cafe 3S in North Beach, which was his favorite hangout. And we talked for hours about how he got into World War II, what he did. And Deanne Fitzmaurice, Chronicle photographer, came and went, you know, and there was a lot of things to cover, and I'm not going to hit them all. But the most interesting thing was that he was a subchaser commander. He was actually a skipper of a subchaser, 130-foot long boat, bristling with guns and depth charge launchers and torpedo tubes. And the subchasers were built kind of late in the war. They started to be delivered in early 1943. And among the first 3 subchasers built were put on the deck of a Liberty ship. Lawrence and his 2 other captains and their crews were in Miami waiting for them to be delivered so they could patrol off the Florida Keys. When the Liberty ship arrived, they were told, we're not taking the subchasers off, you're getting on. And you're on a secret mission now, and you know, you're radio silent, you can't tell anybody you're leaving or where you're going. So they wind up in Belfast, and then they wind up in Scotland, and then they find out their job is delivering these subchasers to the Norwegian resistance. And they're going to train the Norwegian resistance to operate these things because they've been running fishing boats from Norway to a secret base in the Shetland Islands and back, and the boats are too slow and they take too long, and they're getting the shit shot out of them by the Germans. So now we're going to put them on faster boats that can shoot back. And so that was his job. And I go, wow, that's really something. I'm going to, see if I can find out what happened in Norway. Because, at the time I was thinking, resistors, and I'm thinking the French resistance, right? So all the resistors are guys in berets, leaning on a lamppost, the boulevard of broken dreams, like smoking a gawa, right? And it's like, no, there's the Norwegians, and the Norwegian resistance was, bigger, more robust, more levels of society, and more consequential. It was the Norwegian resistance that kept the Nazis from developing an atomic bomb. And, that's a whole other story. But I kept looking further and further into it. And the more I looked into it, I went, wow, what a wealth of material. I thought, if I ever wanted to write a historic novel, why wouldn't I write about this? And then I thought, well, why don't I write about this? And so I went to Norway and researched it. And the cover represents one of those fishing boats that was originally used. And I thought I would write about it all the way up to the dawn of the subchasers, but I never got there. I started writing April of 1940 with the invasion, Nazi invasion. Hitler invaded Norway much the same way Putin just invaded Ukraine, and for many of the same reasons. And so the Splinter goes from April of 1940 to December of 1940. I've still got 5 more years to write. So there'll be a sequel.
So that's the novel.
You want to see it?
That's the novel.
This novel that's coming out in May. Yeah, so Splinter is being published as we speak, and will be released in May. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So May 17th is Norwegian Constitution Day. It's their 4th of July. That's where we're aiming.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
What's that?
Where can we find it?
Hopefully everywhere.
Yeah, it'll be out there,
I
I'm
mean,
sure.
I will probably, I'll be doing some, readings in the Bay Area. I'll try to do, I definitely try to do gallery and book passage, Green Apple, and a book sync. And if you, I'll put up, bulletins on my newsletter. If you don't get it, all the things I've been spouting out about tonight, I also publish on my newsletter. So you're welcome. It's free. I've got back issues on my site. So
Are you saying, Paul, that the beginning of this novel started with Pearl and Getty, this interview?
well, when there was one of the 3 subchasers has been found and restored completely as a historical exhibit. One of the 3 that he delivered. It's called the Hitra, and it's in the harbor at Haakonsvern in Bergen. And I toured, with the permission of the Norwegian Navy, I toured Haakonsvern, and I was on the Hitra for like 2 hours, and I photographed it from stem to stern. And I made a 100-page photograph book of the Hitra and gave it to Ferlinghetti for his 100th birthday.
Oh,
That
wow.
was his payback for giving me such a great idea.
Well, Paul, I really want to thank you. It's been very engaging and entertaining, and